I've been working as an overnight stalker at Walmart for a few months now, and I've always enjoyed the quiet nights in the aisles, with only the sound of boxes being opened and the faint hum of the refrigerators. But that night, from the very beginning of my shift, I felt like something was off. While organizing products in one of the more isolated aisles, I noticed a man standing at the far end, near the electronics section. I didn't think much of it at first. New hires sometimes show up without any notice. But he wasn't wearing a uniform, and strangely, he seemed more interested in observing than doing anything. I went back to work, thinking maybe he was waiting for a manager or instructions. But after half an hour, I realized he was still there, and the uneasiness began to creep in. As I moved through the aisles, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It wasn't the first time I'd felt this way, but that night, it felt different. I decided to check the aisle where I had seen the man, but he was gone. Everything seemed normal until I noticed a small, folded piece of paper on the floor right where he had been standing. Thinking it was trash, I picked it up, but my stomach turned when I read what was written. "You're getting tired, aren't you? I know you like to stop in aisle 6 at 3:30. I stood there frozen for a moment, trying to make sense of what was happening. My first thought was that it was a bad joke from a coworker. It wouldn't be the first time someone tried to lighten up the night shift with a prank. But as I kept working, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. I moved between aisles, trying to focus on the boxes, but my eyes kept darting to empty shelves and dark corners. At one point, I thought I saw something move in the aisle next to me, but when I checked, no one was there. That made me even more uneasy. After a while, I found another piece of paper near the cleaning supplies section. This one was even more specific. "You always finish here before you leave. Maybe we should talk tonight." A chill ran down my spine. How did someone know I always ended my shift by reorganizing that section? It was a habit of mine because it was usually the messiest area by the end of the day, but I'd never mentioned it to anyone. I looked around, trying to find any logical explanation, but the heavy silence of the store felt more oppressive. I clenched the paper in my hand and glanced at the security cameras, but as usual, no one seemed to be watching. I decided to ignore the notes for a while and keep working, but it was impossible not to feel on edge. Every noise, every shadow seemed magnified. While walking through the frozen foods aisle, I heard something that made my heart race. Footsteps. Quick, light, like someone trying to move quietly. I turned around fast, but saw nothing but an unsettling emptiness. I felt ridiculous, like I was letting paranoia get the best of me, but the fear began to mix with growing frustration. Whoever this was, they clearly knew what they were doing. I grabbed my walkie-talkie and thought about calling security, but I hesitated. How could I explain this without sounding crazy? Then I found a third note, this time on the cart I was using to organize products. The message was short, but hit me like a punch. "You need to get better sleep. Last night you stayed up until 2:47, didn't you?" My whole body went cold. How did this person know that? I really had been up late the night before, tossing and turning, unable to sleep. I looked around, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it echoed in the aisle. It wasn't just a prank or an attempt to scare me anymore. It was personal. This person was watching me outside of work, knew details about my routine. Suddenly, Walmart didn't feel safe anymore. Every minute of the shift felt like an eternity after that. I started walking faster through the aisles, my eyes scanning for any strange movement, but the heavy silence of the empty store only heightened my paranoia. The feeling of being followed became overwhelming, almost as if I could sense someone's eyes on me from some dark corner. When I turned to organize shelves in the gardening section, something on the floor caught my attention. It was another note, folded neatly and placed where I couldn't miss it. It read, "I like the way you rush, like it'll save you." The words got to me in a way that's hard to describe. It wasn't just the content of the message, but the tone, almost teasing, as if the person writing it was enjoying my fear. I decided to walk toward the back room, near the stock area where other employees usually stayed. On the way, I saw a shadow move quickly across the aisle ahead of me. I froze, my heart in my throat. I ran toward it, but again, there was nothing. Only another note stuck to the shelf. "Come closer. I know you want answers." That was it. I wasn't just scared. I was terrified. Breathing heavily, almost running, I headed straight for the stockroom. I needed a moment to think, a place where I felt less exposed. In the stockroom, the fluorescent lights flickered slightly, and the sound of industrial fans only made the silence more oppressive. I looked around, trying to find any sign of who could be doing this, but the space was empty as usual. I pulled out my phone to check the time and saw that I still had nearly 2 hours left on my shift. I couldn't just leave. The doors were locked, and only the security guard could open them. Even so, I texted him, asking him to do a sweep of the store. I waited a few minutes, but there was no reply. When I went back to the sales floor, I noticed something was off. My stocking cart, which I had left in the gardening section, was now in the toy aisle. It was impossible not to notice. It was positioned in the middle of the aisle, as if placed there deliberately to make me walk toward it. I approached cautiously, my eyes scanning every corner, but I didn't see anyone. On the cart was another note, this time longer. The message made my stomach churn. "You're more predictable than you think. Your footsteps echo like a clock, marking every second you're here. Have you thought that maybe I'm closer than you realize?" By now, the feeling of being watched was almost unbearable. My mind was racing. Every noise felt louder, every shadow more threatening. I decided I wasn't going to walk aimlessly around the store anymore. If they wanted to scare me, they'd have to come to me. I went back to the dairy aisle, where I still had some boxes to organize, trying to focus, but my hands were shaking. Then I heard a low, steady sound, like breathing, coming from behind one of the shelves. My body froze for a moment. It couldn't be real. It was as if someone was right there, but when I turned to look, nothing. Just the empty aisle and the hum of the refrigerators. The feeling of losing my mind took over. Before I could walk away, I caught something in the reflection of the refrigerator glass in front of me. A figure, small and fast, disappearing toward the end of the aisle. My heart raced, and on impulse, I ran after it. When I turned the corner, there was nothing there except another note on the floor. I picked it up with trembling hands. "You'll never see me unless I want you to, but I see you, always, even when you think you're alone." A cold chill ran down my spine, and the only thing I could think was that this wasn't a prank anymore. It was serious, and I was completely at the mercy of whoever this was. With no other options, I decided to leave the stockroom and head to the front of the store, where the lights were brighter and the space felt less threatening. Every step echoed in the empty aisles, and the silence now was almost deafening. When I reached the register area, I turned back, expecting to see something, anything, but there was no one there. I grabbed my walkie-talkie and called the security guard again, practically begging for him to respond. That's when I heard a loud noise coming from the electronics section, like something had fallen. My courage was replaced with pure terror, but I forced myself to go check. When I arrived, what I saw made my legs go weak. All the appliances were neatly lined up, forming a pathway. At the end was another note attached to a coffee maker. I walked slowly, my chest tight, each step heavier than the last. When I finally reached the note, my hands were shaking so much I could barely open it. The words, written in unnervingly neat handwriting, were simple but devastating. "You're almost at the end, but don't worry, I'll always be around." At that moment, the store lights flickered violently, and a strange noise echoed around me, a metallic buzzing mixed with faint whispers. Then everything went silent again. There were no more notes, no signs of anyone following me. The shift ended, and I left the store as fast as I could. To this day, I don't know who did it or how they knew so much about me. I never went back to that job, but sometimes I still feel like I'm being watched. I've never liked grocery shopping late at night, but with 2 kids at home and a crazy work schedule, it was the only time I had. That night, Walmart was nearly empty. There was something unsettling about the silence, like it was too quiet, even for that hour. I grabbed a cart and started going down the aisles, trying to finish quickly. While picking up some cereal boxes, I noticed a man standing at the far end of the aisle. He didn't seem to be shopping, just watching me. I tried to ignore him, but when I turned into the next aisle, there was another man, closer this time, pretending to be distracted but clearly paying attention to what I was doing. My stomach sank. I kept pretending not to notice, but my mind was racing. Maybe it was just paranoia, I thought, but the way they moved through the aisles, keeping a certain distance, was too strange to be a coincidence. I sped up, grabbed just the essentials, and headed straight for the checkout. The man from the cereal aisle walked past me and left the store, while the other one stayed near the entrance, casually looking at his phone. With trembling hands, I paid for my groceries and pushed the cart toward the door. When I stepped outside, the parking lot was nearly empty, except for 1 or 2 cars, including mine, parked under a flickering light. I wanted to believe I was overreacting, but something felt off. I pushed the cart to my car, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. But when I got closer, the silence in the parking lot felt oppressive. I tossed the bags into the back seat, keys already in hand. That's when I noticed the 2 men on the other side of the lot, talking quietly but watching me. My heart started racing. I got into the car and turned the key, ready to leave as fast as I could. The engine wouldn't start. I tried again. Nothing. It was as if the battery had suddenly died, but I knew the car had been fine that morning. I looked around, trying to figure out what to do. They were still there, now slowly moving in my direction, like they were waiting for something. My first instinct was to run back to Walmart, but the entrance felt so far away at that moment. I grabbed my phone to call someone, but of course, as always, the battery was nearly dead. I managed to unlock the screen before it shut off completely. My heart was pounding, and my hands were shaking. I was stuck there facing 2 bad options: stay and hope for help that might never come, or run and risk exposing myself even more. I tried to convince myself it might just be a coincidence, that the car breaking down and those men being there didn't mean anything. But my gut told me otherwise. I unlocked the trunk, searching for anything that could protect me. I found an old tire iron I kept for emergencies. It wasn't much, but at least I wasn't completely defenseless. When I closed the trunk, the 2 men were closer, walking toward me with a terrifying calmness, like they knew I had no way out. My instinct was to run, but my feet felt glued to the ground. Finally, I forced myself to move, but instead of heading back to Walmart, I decided to go toward a nearby side street. Maybe I could escape without them noticing. But as I took the first few steps, I heard a metallic sound behind me. I turned quickly and saw that one of the men was holding something in his hand. It looked like a metal bar. The other was on his phone, but he wasn't calling anyone. They were texting each other. My blood ran cold. Everything felt calculated, like they had planned this all along. I felt like a trapped animal, and every step I took felt like the wrong one. I took a deep breath, trying to control the panic, and started walking faster toward the side street. I could hear footsteps behind me. They weren't running, but the sound was unmistakable. I knew they were following me. I looked around, searching for somewhere to hide or someone who could help me, but the parking lot was deserted, and the street ahead didn't seem any better. The nearest streetlight flickered, casting shadows that made my heart race even more. I tightened my grip on the tire iron and turned around suddenly, hoping it would at least scare them. "What do you want?" I yelled, my voice weaker than I expected. They stopped for a moment, exchanged a look, and gave me a smile that sent chills down my spine. They didn't answer, just kept walking, as if they were trying to intimidate me. That's when I realized standing still would only make things worse. I turned my back to them and started running. The sound of my footsteps echoed in the silence, mixed with the sound of theirs behind me. It wasn't a fast chase. It was like they were toying with me, giving me a bit of a head start to heighten my fear. When I reached the sidewalk leading to the side street, I tripped on a loose piece of concrete and nearly fell. My heart was pounding out of my chest. All I knew in that moment was that I had to keep going. I kept running down the side street, but soon realized it led to nowhere. It was a narrow, dark path with tall walls on both sides and no clear way out. My body was starting to give out. Every step felt harder than the last. Behind me, their footsteps grew louder. They knew I was cornered. The only thing I could do was hide. I ducked behind a pile of old crates near one of the walls. My breathing was heavy, and I tried to quiet it, but it was almost impossible. My chest rose and fell in desperation, and my hands were so sweaty I almost dropped the tire iron. The footsteps stopped suddenly. They were close, but I couldn't see them. The silence was even more terrifying than the sound. I heard one of them say something quietly, but I couldn't make out the words. Then I heard the sound of something being dragged, maybe the metal bar, and it made me sweat even more. For a moment, I thought they might have left, but then a voice echoed in the darkness, low and mocking. "Do you think you can hide from us?" My stomach turned. My legs were shaking, but I couldn't move. I was completely alone, with no one to hear me if I screamed. I knew it was now or never. Even though I was trembling, I raised the tire iron in their direction, trying to look braver than I felt. One of them stepped closer, laughing, as if he wasn't taking me seriously. "Are you really going to try that?" he said, finally breaking the silence. That cold, detached voice made me realize how vulnerable I was. Before I could think, he lunged. Instinctively, I swung the tire iron with all my strength. I don't know if I hit him or if he stepped back out of reflex, but that brief second was enough for me to turn and run again. This time, I had no direction. My only thought was to get as far away from them as possible, even if it meant moving further from help. I ran past my car, which now felt like a useless symbol of safety, and headed back toward Walmart. They weren't far behind. Their footsteps echoed louder, more determined. When I reached the entrance, the automatic doors slid open with a strange mechanical noise, like the building itself was reluctant to let me in. The empty store, which had felt unsettling before, was now my only refuge. I ran inside, praying someone, anyone, would be there to help me. The inside of the store felt surreal. The fluorescent lights lit up every corner, but the place was deserted, as if everyone had vanished. I ran to the customer service desk, but no one was there. "Help!" I shouted, my voice echoing through the aisles. But the silence that followed was so heavy it made my stomach drop. I heard the automatic doors open behind me. They had entered. My heart raced again. I started running through the aisles, dodging shelves and looking for somewhere to hide. Everything felt endless, like I was in a maze with no exit. I hid behind a shelf of cleaning supplies, trying to calm down, but then I heard something that froze me to my core. Footsteps inside the store, slow and deliberate. They were hunting me, and the sound of their shoes on the tiled floor made every muscle in my body tense. That's when the lights started flickering and the store's PA system turned on, but all it emitted was static. I covered my mouth with my hands to keep from screaming, and that's when I heard the voice again, the same one that had spoken to me outside. "Do you think you can run?" It was the last thing I heard before everything went completely dark. I never thought I'd share this, but I can't stop thinking about that night. Maybe writing it down will help. I've been working the night shift at a Walmart for almost 3 years, and nothing even close to this had ever happened before. It started out as a regular, uneventful night. Just a few customers, the monotonous sound of shopping carts echoing through the empty aisles, and me restocking shelves in the home goods section. That's when I heard it. At first, I thought it was just someone arguing, but within seconds, it was clear it was a scream, one filled with desperation. A woman was shouting for her child, her voice frantic, and it made me drop everything and run toward the noise. I found her in the frozen foods aisle. She looked panicked, her head snapping in every direction, like she was trying to take in everything all at once. Between gasping breaths, she yelled that her son Timmy had vanished while they were in the toy section. My heart was racing. At that hour, the store was practically empty, and all I could think was how someone could disappear so quickly. I grabbed my walkie-talkie and alerted security, who rushed to the control panel to lock the doors. It was standard procedure. No one could leave or enter while we searched. But as we began looking for Timmy, a growing sense of dread started creeping in. Something about this felt deeply wrong. While some employees began combing the aisles, I went straight to the toy section where the woman had said she last saw her son. I can't explain it, but the moment I stepped into the aisle, I felt a strange chill, like the temperature had dropped. The aisle was brightly lit, full of colorful packaging and cheerful toys, but something about it felt off. After a few minutes of searching between the shelves, I noticed something on the floor that made my stomach drop. A small blue sneaker with white laces lay abandoned, as if it had been tossed aside. It was the size you'd expect for a little boy. I picked it up, my mind racing between trying to convince myself it was a coincidence and feeling that something far more sinister was happening. I kept looking around, calling Timmy's name, but the silence in that aisle was oppressive. That's when I saw something else. A small red backpack, tucked away under one of the lower shelves, partially hidden behind some boxes of toys. It looked like one of those little kid backpacks with dinosaur designs. My stomach turned. I knew I should call for someone, but a strange pull made me keep going, as if I needed to see this through. I grabbed the backpack, looked around one last time, and walked toward the back of the aisle, where a narrow hallway led to what should have been a staff-only area. But in that moment, it felt like so much more than that. The hallway to the staff area felt different from the rest of the store. The lights weren't as bright, and the ambient hum you usually hear, the sound you don't even notice until it's gone, was absent. My heart was pounding, but I couldn't turn back without checking. The hallway led to a door of an old storeroom that I knew hadn't been used in years. One of the managers had mentioned once that it was decommissioned because it was too small and impractical. So we only used the larger storerooms at the back. But here it was, slightly ajar, with a crack of darkness that seemed to beckon me inside. I called into my walkie-talkie to alert security and the search team, but all I got was static. I thought about going back to get someone, but curiosity, or maybe the fear of wasting critical time, pushed me forward. I carefully pushed the door open, and immediately the smell hit me. It was a mix of dust and something metallic, like rust. The space was cramped, filled with old shelves and random stacks of boxes. The light from my phone barely cut through the thick shadows. The floor was covered in grime, and right in the center of the room, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A doll. An old, ragged cloth doll, sitting upright in the middle of the floor, as if someone had deliberately placed it there. It was definitely not something we sold in the store. That much I was sure of. That doll made no sense. It looked handmade, with rough stitching and button eyes that glinted eerily in my flashlight's beam. I wanted to run, but my legs felt like they were rooted to the spot. For some reason, I crouched down to get a closer look. That's when I noticed the fabric of the doll was dirty, as though it had been dragged across the floor for years. There was something attached to its arm, a small piece of paper. My hands trembled as I pulled it free and shone my flashlight on it. The paper had just one word scrawled in childish handwriting: help. At that moment, a loud crash echoed from somewhere deeper in the storeroom, like something heavy had fallen. I spun around so fast I nearly dropped my phone. Is someone there? My voice came out louder than I intended, but the silence that followed was even more terrifying. Slowly, I moved toward where the noise had come from, my flashlight guiding the way. In the back of the room, near some broken crates, I saw movement. It wasn't footsteps, but a low, uneven dragging sound, like someone, or something, was trying to stay hidden. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but the thought that it might be Timmy kept me moving forward. As I got closer, I saw a shadow, long and distorted, stretching across the wall, a shadow far larger than anything in the room could have cast. It made no sense. There was nothing there that could explain it. My entire body was on high alert. The shadow seemed to move on its own, almost as if it were alive. I froze for a few seconds, unable to decide whether to step forward or run. But before I could do anything, I heard a sound behind me. Laughter. It wasn't loud or mocking. It was soft, muffled, like a child trying to play hide and seek. I whipped my flashlight around so fast I nearly lost my balance, but there was no one there, just the empty hallway and the dusty shelves. My heart pounded in my chest, and that's when the laughter stopped, replaced by something even worse, the sound of something scraping across the floor coming from deeper inside the storeroom. I decided that was it. I needed to get out. I started backing toward the door, trying not to take my eyes off the room. When I took my first step back, something moved again, closer this time. I felt a chill in the air, like someone had just brushed past me. Then I heard it. A faint whisper, so low it was almost inaudible, but enough to send shivers down my spine. I couldn't make out what it was saying, but it sounded like a child's voice, weak, coming from all directions at once. My hands were so sweaty, I almost dropped my phone, and all I could think was, this isn't normal. This isn't real. I was almost at the door when something fell right beside me. An object rolled across the floor and stopped at my feet. I pointed the flashlight at it and saw it was another doll, but this one was different. It had a hand-drawn face with oversized eyes and a crooked smile that seemed to mock me. I knew that doll hadn't been there before. Instinct finally kicked in, and I turned to leave for good. But when I grabbed the doorknob, it wouldn't budge. I twisted it hard, but it was like it had locked itself. My panic spiked as I yanked at the handle, but then the laughter came back, this time louder, clearer, and definitely coming from inside the storeroom. My entire body froze, but my mind screamed at me to get out of there. I stepped back from the door, still keeping it in view, when my flashlight lit up something in the corner of the storeroom that I hadn't noticed before. It was a small plastic chair, the kind meant for little kids. It was facing the wall, but it gave the eerie impression that someone had just been sitting in it. Next to the chair was a piece of fabric, and I recognized it immediately. It matched the material of the backpack I had found in the toy section. My heart was racing even more, and all I could think was that I had to get out of there before something truly awful happened. I started pounding on the door, yelling for anyone to hear me. After what felt like an eternity, I heard footsteps on the other side of the door. Relief flooded through me, but it was short-lived. Before I could say anything, the footsteps stopped, and the doorknob began to turn slowly. For a second, I thought someone was finally there to help. But when the door opened, the hallway was completely empty. No one, not a single sign of another person. I could barely breathe, but I bolted out of the storeroom without looking back. When I reached the main aisle of the store, everything seemed exactly as it should. The other employees were still searching for the boy, and his mother was still crying in the frozen food section. It was like time had stopped in the store while I was in the storeroom. I tried to explain what had happened, but the words wouldn't come out. All I could do was point toward the hallway where the storeroom was. When security finally went back there with me, the door was locked again, just as I had found it earlier. He tried to open it, but said he didn't have the key to that storeroom since it had been out of use for years. Still, when he peeked through the crack, he didn't see anything unusual. No dolls, no chair, nothing. Just dust and empty boxes. The other employees started giving me strange looks, like I had made the whole thing up. And to make matters worse, the boy was never found. To this day, I wonder what really happened in that storeroom and whether, somehow, Timmy is still in there. I've been working at the customer service desk at Walmart for almost 2 years, and I've seen all kinds of things. People trying to return items that were clearly used, things the store doesn't even sell, and even half-eaten food. But something happened recently that gave me chills like never before. It was an ordinary afternoon when a man walked in carrying a bag full of items for a return. It's not unusual for people to return things without a receipt, but his items were odd. The first was a large kitchen knife, still in its packaging, but it looked like it had been hastily removed and put back. Then, the following week, he came back with a roll of duct tape, the thick, heavy-duty kind you can use to fix almost anything. He didn't have a receipt, but insisted he bought it there and didn't need it anymore. At first, I just thought it was weird, but nothing more. Things started to feel off when he showed up for the third time. This time, he brought a pack of tarps, the kind people use to cover furniture while painting or to protect floors from dirt. It wasn't just the frequency of his returns that caught my attention, but the way he acted. He never explained why he was returning these things, only saying he changed his mind or bought them by mistake. On top of that, he would always watch me in a way that made me uncomfortable. It wasn't the frustrated glare of an annoyed customer. It was something else. Something more intense. It felt like he was analyzing me, trying to figure something out. That's when I decided to keep a closer eye on him. The next time he came in, I was ready. I kept an eye on him from the moment he walked into the store. This time, he didn't go straight to the counter like usual. Instead, he wandered through the aisles, picking up random things but not really looking interested in them. It was like he was trying to blend in. What really unsettled me was how much he stared at the employees. Not just at me, but at everyone nearby. He did it so subtly that if I hadn't been watching closely, I might not have noticed. But there was something in his eyes that was impossible to ignore. It was like he was sizing people up, studying their routines and behaviors. That chill ran down my spine again, and it stayed with me for the rest of my shift. When he finally came to the counter, he brought yet another strange item, a pair of industrial rubber gloves. I asked why he was returning them, and he answered with an awkward smile, "Oh, I bought the wrong kind. They're not what I need." It didn't seem like a genuine response, but I didn't have a reason to question him further. As I processed the return, he stared at me the entire time. It wasn't just a casual glance, it felt deliberate, like he wanted me to know he was watching me. When I finished, he thanked me in a flat, automatic tone and walked away. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that he hadn't really left. It was like his presence lingered, keeping me on edge. That night, as we were closing up, I mentioned the man to my coworker, David. I didn't go into too much detail, just said he seemed off, and that he returned unusual things too often. David shrugged and joked, "Weirdos are everywhere at Walmart." I tried to laugh it off, but deep down, I knew this wasn't something to joke about. I kept replaying the items he'd returned in my head: knives, tarps, duct tape, gloves. It all seemed like part of a kit. But for what? I couldn't stop that question from looping in my mind as I walked to my car in the dark parking lot. Then, I realized I wasn't alone. As I got into my car, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw someone standing near the store entrance. They were leaning against a post, half hidden in the shadows, but I knew it was him. I was sure of it. He wasn't looking at the store or the cars. He was looking directly at me. For a moment, I froze, not knowing what to do. I had my keys in my hand, ready to start the car, but it felt like moving would draw even more attention to myself. My heart was pounding so loud I could barely hear anything else. All I could think about was the intensity of his stare, like he was waiting for something. I sat there, motionless, for what felt like hours, trying to decide what to do. He didn't move. He just stood there, watching me like he had all the time in the world. Finally, I mustered enough courage to start the car. The engine's noise echoed through the empty parking lot, and that seemed to snap him out of his trance. He took a step forward, moving out of the shadows, and that's when the panic hit me. I slammed my foot on the gas and drove off as fast as I could, My heart was racing so hard I could barely focus on the road. All I could think about was how his eyes stayed locked on me until I was out of sight. When I got home, I couldn't calm down. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, his eyes fixed on me, and that unsettling smirk. I decided I had to tell someone, so I texted my manager, Jake, and explained everything. To my surprise, he took it seriously and said he'd check the security footage. That gave me some relief, but not enough to shake the fear. Even at home, with the doors locked, I felt exposed, like he could show up at any moment. I barely slept that night, jumping at every noise outside and imagining the worst. The next day, I tried to convince myself I was overreacting. Maybe he was just a creepy guy but harmless. Still, I couldn't relax. I spent my shift scanning the entrance, watching every customer who came in, especially the men. Near the end of my shift, he came back. This time, he didn't bring anything to return, and that made my stomach drop. He walked in through the main doors but didn't head to the aisles or the counter. He just stood there for a moment, like he was waiting for something. When our eyes met, I felt that chill again. He gave me a small, almost imperceptible smile and started wandering the store. I couldn't stop watching him as he moved. He wasn't shopping, he was observing. He stopped in the tools aisle, picking up items and putting them back, but it was clear he wasn't there to buy anything. What scared me most was when I noticed he wasn't just watching me anymore. He was watching my coworkers, especially the ones working alone in the quieter sections of the store. Every time he passed someone, I felt like something terrible was about to happen. I debated whether to call security or even the police, but I was afraid of being dismissed as paranoid. Deep down, though, I knew this wasn't just paranoia. Something was very wrong. I couldn't take it anymore. I went to the manager's office and explained everything. Jake called security, and we started monitoring the guy through the cameras. On the screen, I saw him standing in the tools aisle, holding a hammer. But he didn't look like he wanted to buy it. He just stared around the store, like he was calculating something. Then, he did something that made my stomach drop. He looked directly at one of the cameras and smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was slow and deliberate, like he knew we were watching him. He put the hammer back on the shelf and started walking toward the exit. Security followed him discreetly into the parking lot, but somehow he vanished between the cars, like he knew exactly where to go to avoid being seen. I felt a small sense of relief that he was gone, but it didn't last. That image of him smiling at the camera stuck with me, like a message he wanted to leave behind. I never saw him again after that. But even now, I can't shake the feeling that he'll show up one day. And when he does, I don't know what will happen.